So today I wanted to talk about life and how we can look at a night dream that we are familiar with. We have a frame of reference for a night dream, and we have a frame of reference from outside. When we wake up, we can look at what a dream was and analyze it, come to understand better what the nature of a night dream is. This is something that is possible for us to do from our own experience. And what's interesting with a teaching is that a teaching usually, in fact I would say always, if it's a real teaching, will come from a person's own experience. So a teacher will really put into words what their process was. And their process would have been affected by the words of another teaching. And so it makes sense that what they put into words is going to be their experience, which will include a lot of previous teachings in it as well. Because the previous teachings are there to point so that someone has their own realization, seeing of what is. So in my particular journey, analyzing life relative to a dream, so coming to see, understand a night dream, and then looking at life and trying to figure out how life could be the same. And the reason I started with this interest is because a lot of the teachings and wisdom texts that I was reading as pointers were continually saying life is a dream, life is an illusion, life is an arising in consciousness. Life is not real. Everything is transitory. So, for some reason, well, I think it's more than some reason, what I was reading was specifically referring to dream. Life is a dream. And so I spent a lot of time walking around a park, which I did every day, more or less, for several hours, contemplating life as a dream and observing and trying to understand how this experience, which at the time I wasn't necessarily clear was an experience, how life could possibly be a dream. Why is it being referred to time and time again in spiritual texts as a dream? And even in teachings that don't refer to it as a dream, when we understand it as a dream, or start to see what that means, then we see that so many other teachings are pointing to fundamentally the same thing, without using the word dream. So an example of that is in non-dual teachings. Everything is a single arising in consciousness, made of consciousness, witnessed by consciousness, and arising in consciousness. That which witnesses is not separate from that which is witnessed. There is just witnessing, no witnesser, just witnessing as a single happening. So in that, there hasn't been a mention of a dream per se. But essentially that description, when we look at what a dream is very complementary, very parallel. So I'd like to talk a little bit about dreams and how we can possibly come to see life as a dream, and more importantly, how does that relate to what we're really looking for? Because to have a philosophical discussion about life being a dream, well, it might be fun, but what's the point, really? Do I need to spend a lot of time understanding life as a dream? And my answer would be no. What is the point of spending a lot of time in something if it doesn't contribute to what we're really looking for? It just so happens that coming to understand life as a dream does contribute a large amount to what we're really looking for. And so in this case, talking about a dream, talking about life being a dream or akin to a dream, is very relevant to what we're really looking for, very relevant to happiness for the human being. And so after the initial discussion, hopefully we can start tying in the teachings of daily living, the teachings that are put forward on a regular basis about life being predestined, life being a happening, me not being the doer, the other not being the doer, how my true essence is not physical, how what I am looking for in the flow of life is not, or how the flow of life is not going to give me completeness. All of these things can start to make sense once we understand the nature of life as a dream. So one of the important distinctions or qualifications or definitions that I'm going to put in now is that I can stop using the word dream as much as I'm using it now. It can be a little confusing, and change the word dream for experience. So when we look at a dream at night, a night dream that we have experienced, we can see that that is an experience. And when we wake up, it becomes clear that it wasn't as objective as it appeared to be when the experience was happening. So the man that might have been chasing the main character in the dream, where is he? He doesn't exist. It was a figment of imagination. He was a part of this creation, the dream, the experience that came into existence and then ended. And so from outside the dream, we can see that it is much less objective than it seemed from within the dream. Objective meaning real. And here we can see that the dream just vanished. The man wasn't as real as it appeared. So this word experience, when looking at a dream, we can see a dream is an experience, a momentary experience arising in mind. In life, we talk about having great experiences. So if we have an amazing dinner, say that was a great experience. Or if we talk to someone that we've never spoken to and it's an interesting discussion, that was a great experience. Or if we go on a roller coaster ride, that was a great experience or a terrible experience. And so we use the word generally, we use the word experience to talk about specific experience in life, events in life that stand out. But really when we look at what experience is, it's an experience of awareness of what we call sense objects and thoughts and feelings. So this great experience is really the awareness of taste or sight or some emotional feelings that happen or some physical sensations. And so being aware of a photograph or a mug is really an experience. It's just an experience that we don't register as being anything special. But to be aware of the floor or the tree is an experience of the tree. It's just that it's ordinary, so we don't treat it as anything special. But to the extent we come to see that in life, everything is experience. Even the feeling of love is an experience. It's less tangible than the experience of a mug or a tree, but it's an experience recognized by an awareness of the experience. So let's go back to the night dream. A night dream spontaneously arises out of nothing in the mind of a dreamer. What I mean by out of nothing is that if we were in deep sleep, there is no dream. Nothing is present in the mind at that point in time. Not even time. Deep sleep is the absence of awareness and the absence of time and space. And at some moment when we shift from deep sleep, when I say we shift, I'm using these words lightly, when the experience shifts from the absence of experience, deep sleep, the absence of experience, the absence of even awareness, into an explosion of experience. So the creation of a night dream, going from nothing to everything. And everything at that point is the world, the dream world that has sprung into existence. And that dream world that sprung into existence may be a beach environment, let's say. So a whole ocean has suddenly appeared in mind. And there's a beach, and the beach is full of people. And one of those people, character, part of the experience, is what appears to be the main character of the dream. And the main character seems to be the experiencer of the dream. The dream is an experience that appears as if it's being experienced from the perspective of the main character. And the main character finds himself, for example, in the dream, walking up the beach, looking out over the horizon, looking at all the people, sunbathing and swimming in the ocean, seeing dolphins on the horizon, seagulls flying across the sky, little kids playing in the sand, and he can feel the water lapping up onto his feet, and he can feel the sun rays on his body, all of which is the created experience, the dream, designed to unfold exactly as it unfolds. The main character in the dream is not in control of what he sees next, is not in control of where he places his foot next. It's all unfolding like a story. However, from the perspective of the character, the feeling is that he is a separate, independent entity, in control of where he puts his foot next, in control of where he turns his head next, because the dream, a creation, a spontaneous creation in consciousness, has been designed to unfold like a movie, like a story, designed to be experienced as if it is an objective world of time and space, designed to be experienced as if there is a main character that has complete control over everything he thinks, everything he says, and everything he does. So when the character sees someone he recognizes, oh, hi, that's John. Hey, John, I haven't seen you in 15 years. And John looks at him and says, hey, Peter, nice to see you. And they have a conversation. That conversation is a conversation that happened because it's destined for a character, Peter, to see a character, John, that within the dream appears to be a childhood friend. And then in the dream there is a discussion that happens between the two of them. They talk about another friend who has now gone to live overseas. And when that is finished, Peter continues walking down the beach, thinking that this is an objective reality and that he was in control of what happens moment after moment after moment. At some point in time, the dream comes to an end. It is the end of the story. And the whole dream world that has spontaneously arisen in consciousness collapses back to nothing. Or, so it collapses back to nothing and may be instantaneously replaced by a brand new dream experience. Another world comes into existence. Let's say this world that comes into existence is a world of roads and shopping malls. And the main character, which could be a different main character wearing different clothes, walks down the road, looks into shops, and all of the shops that he looks into are there because they are intrinsically part of the dream world that has been created. What shops he comes across next is predetermined by the creation and by the storyline, which includes the movement of the main character through this dream world. And then once again, in an instant, the dream can collapse. The whole set of buildings and roads and cars and people, where are they? They weren't real. They were a creation in consciousness, experienced by the very consciousness in which the creation arose. And the character, if the character disappears, if the character is hurt or killed, makes absolutely no difference to the consciousness in which the dream arose.
Roger, you said the different kind of character in next dream. When I have dreams, I always have impression that I am the same character in the dreams.
Mm-hmm. You could have a dream where you are 10 years old, as opposed to a dream when you are 50 years old. And so that shows that the character in the dream is able to be whatever is dictated by the dream. So generally, you'll have a dream where the character is your current age, let's say. You know that it's possible for there to be a dream where you are not the same age. Generally, it's you know yourself as you know yourself in daily life. But already seeing the possibility of two shows that, the character is not as consistent as I think. And then I think we've all had dreams where we were someone else. And when we wake up, we narrate the dream, so not often, but sometimes we have dreams. We narrate the dream to someone that we know, a friend, say, I had this amazing dream. It was about a dog even, but I was the dog. And I go, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how I was the dog. I just know in the dream I was the dog, or I was this other man or other woman. And it was really amazing. This is what happened in the dream. But I was the other character. I can explain why we know, why we feel in the dream that this was me, or this was who I was. There's a reason. But that goes into a different topic. Hopefully from your own experience, you can go, it's true. Generally, I'm the main character as the character I know myself in life, but sometimes not. And whichever character will be the main character is according to that particular dream. So the reason why I'm not sure if it's too soon to talk about the reason why we know that it is I in the dream. I'll leave that till later on. So are there any other questions about what I've been saying?
So I just had a nightmare this night, which I didn't have for, 3 years, I guess, or more. So it's interesting, the intention of the leaving it in the dream. And then when I woke up, it was the timing that was still like catching me. The feeling of a nightmare was really much shorter than I remember before. Mm-hmm. Because before it was like, for a few minutes, like 5 minutes maybe, but now it was like just a few seconds. I just saw it, and the question is what to how to approach this. Does analyzing dreams has some meaning, or because I come to some conclusions sometimes, but I don't want to hold on it because I really don't know if it's.
Mm-hmm. So what this particular topic is not so much about analyzing the content of dreams to get messages. We once again at the end of this we can talk about that as well, but not to mix them up. But there is a relevance in becoming aware of the content of your dream, because it can tell us something that is relevant for our happiness in daily living also. But I hope we can see it's a different topic. We can analyze dream, the fundamental nature of dream, versus analyzing the content of the dream. So at this stage, what we've been saying is that we're looking at the nature of dream. We haven't now said that life is a dream. We're just saying that let's look at our dreams and see what a dream is. The mind of the human is where the dream appears to arise. So we wake up in the morning and it feels like, oh, I was dreaming, and the dream was arising inside my mind, the individual mind. And so for now we have to not jump into beliefs. So if someone says, well, that was the universal mind, we could either just say, oh, okay, I believe it was the universal mind. But when we're taking it step by step, because we don't want to just, we want to come to understand a dream for ourselves. It appears like it arises in my mind, the individual's mind. So we'll keep it at that. So then the analysis of a dream, where we understand the nature of dream as it happens for the individual, needs to be carried over into the teachings that say life is a dream. Now, our experience of life is not that it's a dream, generally speaking. So, generally speaking, the experience, especially before certain seeking starts, the general experience is that life is an objective reality, and I am an objective reality. I am an object in an objective world. I move through an objective world, and what I am is a physical, objective being. That's the experience. The experience of life is that I have control over what I say and what I think and what I do, that the other has control over what they say, think, and do. Now, the wisdom teachings are telling us that life is not as real as it seems. Life is not what it seems. Life is an illusion. Life is Maya, illusion. Life is Lila, a play in consciousness. And this is not limited to just Hindu religion that says this. Hindu religion uses these terminologies more specifically, but when we start looking at other religions, and this is not about religion, but about the wisdom texts and other texts that are outside of what we would class mainstream religions, we see that, so if we listen to mystics it's interwoven in everything they say, pointing to the emptiness, not in a bad way, not the emptiness in a bad way, but they're saying that form is not as full as it seems, that the very essence of form is emptiness. Quantum physics is telling us the same thing. So what we're now seeing is that the mystics and quantum physics are very close, coming close together. So quantum physics, when it looks into matter, it starts on the surface and goes deeper and deeper and deeper and finds smaller and smaller and smaller particles making up matter, until at some point it goes beyond particle to energy, and then even beyond energy to the source of where the energy comes into registerable form, and it said, oh, the base of everything is nothing. So then we look around. I was walking through the park going, okay, so how can this be a dream? And I guess I've outlined an analysis of a night dream, which probably in my investigation took much longer to see it for what I've just described. A spontaneous arising in mind, let's say the individual's mind, but nonetheless mind. The nature of mind is to imagine into existence, to what we know as thinking, to think into existence. So mind creates through imagining. So that's what a dream is, an imagination in mind. And the nature of mind is consciousness. Mind, the very mind in which the creation arises, the very mind that the creation is intrinsically made of, at its core is consciousness. So mind is consciousness. And it is the consciousness of the mind that everything in the story of the dream is made of. And it's the consciousness of the mind that recognizes the creation. And so once this becomes clear, we can say, okay, so possibly what I experience as an objective reality is in fact a dream. And within this dream, within this story, there are sections of the story that appear to be night dreams. And if we look at it from this perspective, we'll see that the experience changes radically when we are in what we call daily living, which now we're thinking, well, maybe it's a dream. Maybe I'm a character in a dream. And when I go to sleep, there isn't so much a character going to sleep, but rather the experience changing radically from waking state to an experience that takes its place, also in the consciousness of the dreamer, but now not the individual dreamer. We're now talking about life as a dream, so we're talking about the mind of God, let's say, or the universal mind in which the universe arises, the universal mind in which this dream that I'm part of, that we're all part of, spontaneously arises, all in the mind of the universal creator, all in consciousness, because the nature of mind is consciousness. And when what we register as me, the individual going to sleep, is simply the dream changing radically from an experience of waking state to an experience of a night dream. So the night dream has taken the place of the waking dream. And when the night dream is over, another night dream replaces it, taking the place of the waking experience, taking the place of the previous dream. Now it is the momentary experience. And then that will come to an end. At some point, there will be the re-emergence of what we call daily living dream, daily living experience. And all of that is designed to create the impression that this is not a dream, that waking state is an objective reality, designed to make it appear that the main character goes to sleep in an objective world, has a dream inside its personal mind, and then wakes back up in the objective world that has been there while it has been dreaming. The dream of life, the experience of life, may be such that it's designed to create the impression that the world is always here, and that I just go to sleep. Whereas if we start looking at it critically, we might say, well, could it be that this experience of life is actually exactly that, an experience? The objective world, when what I experience as me sleeping, me dreaming, is absolutely not there. It has been completely replaced by a dream world. That everything that I know as objectively real has collapsed, been replaced by another experience that then collapses, replaced by another experience that we call waking state again. Is it possible? Is it possible that what we experience as the waking state is simply a momentary experience arising in the consciousness of a mind, and we are characters in that story? And if that's the case, the consciousness that is functioning through this character, Roger, or any of the character, the character you know yourself as. So the fact that I have consciousness is not verifiable to you. You can assume I have consciousness, but I may just be an object in your dream, in the waking dream that you are experiencing. Just like the character in John's dream, the character Peter, may or may not have had consciousness. John knows that from his experience in the dream that John had consciousness. But Peter could have just been an object without consciousness talking to him, because the dream has designed that object to be there and to say exactly the right things at exactly the right time, creating the impression that there were two humans with consciousness talking to each other. What in the dream, what was undeniable was the consciousness of John, or the consciousness that appeared to be John's consciousness. And in your dream, or your experience of life, what is undeniable is your consciousness, the consciousness that appears to be the consciousness of that body. So, assuming that everyone else has consciousness is an assumption, but what you do know is your consciousness. The consciousness which is the consciousness which is aware of the experience. So experience means the sights and the sounds and the smell and the sense of touch, which all layer on top of each other perfectly to create the impression of cause and effect. And then we throw in these interesting experience objects called memory that create the impression that there was a past. And so in a night dream, we see that out of nowhere the dream appears, and the main character may have a memory that he went to school with another person he met in the dream. And the memory says you've known this person for 15 years. Whereas when we analyze the dream, we see there is no such thing as 15 years before. The dream spontaneously arose out of nowhere, and time and space are a product of the content of the dream. And one of the main contents in a dream or in experience is the content of the assumption of a past, which is a memory that says a past existed this way, and the projection into the future. And in a meditation, when all thoughts fall away, when all objects fall away, essentially meditation is the experience changing radically. So we could say the waking state experience changing radically, where all of the objects of the experience fall away, or a lot of the objects fall away, and we are in a space where there might be the odd sound arising, but time and space is only there when certain thoughts arise and certain objects arise to create the impression of time and space. So if in meditation a dog barks, is it really a dog barking, or is it just sound arising in the meditation? The mind might kick in at that point in time and say, that was a dog barking. The dog is outside. And as soon as that thought arises, an inside and an outside has come into existence because of the content of the experience. And if the meditation or the objects in the meditation start to disappear and the thoughts settle down, and when we're really present, or there is presence in the meditation, it becomes clear there is no body as a individual present. There is no time and space. Time and space have fallen away. And yet what is undeniable is that there is this background or foreground, the presence, which has the faculty or the function of being aware and the undeniable sense of existence. I exist. Now, when I use the word I, I'm using an impersonal I. It's I to denote a sense of existence, but it doesn't refer to an individual doer or even an individual person in a deep meditation. The person has fallen away, the thoughts, the personality, the external world has all fallen away. And yet, what never falls away, unless the meditation goes into the unmanifest, which means the absence of experience, until that point, what is ever present in a meditation is the sense of existence that fills the whole spaceless space, is the whole spaceless space, and the function of awareness. And from that basic, most basic form of manifestation, most basic form of experience, most basic form of dream, the dream gets more complex by objects becoming part of the experience. So in each moment, there is experience, and the experience is continually collapsing and re-emerging, creating the impression of movement, time and space. And the most significant aspect that we need to become aware of or understand as being essential for experience, so life is an experience, is the faculty or the function of awareness of the experience. Not as something separate from the awareness. In the end, we'll see that the experience and the awareness are not two, but there can't be experience without awareness being intrinsically part of the experience. So, if we start to analyze life, daily life, and see the parallels between daily life and a dream, and something that's also useful is to maybe see that if the dream we were having just before we wake up was a dream of you sitting in your bed, reading a book, you're in your bed in your bedroom, reading a book, and you have a window in your bedroom, and you can hear birds chirping, and you might even hear two people outside the window talking about a project that's going to happen in your building area. And the conversation grabs your attention, and you listen to these men talking about how they're going to plant the gardens around the building. They're doing a landscape project. And so this is, what I'm putting forward here is a dream that you're having while what we would assume I'm lying in my bed, in my bedroom. And the dream that you are having while you're, what we assume, lying in the bed in the bedroom, is of you sitting in your bed in the bedroom, awake, reading a book, and listening to a conversation of plants that are going to be planted, and listening to some birds chirping. Now, let's assume that in the waking state, while you're asleep, there are no men outside your room talking and no birds chirping. And you're having this dream, and it's destined for the dream to end abruptly at the point where the men say, now these are the plants that I intend to plant. And he's about to list all of the plants. And at the point where the dream ends, you wake up abruptly in your bed, sit up, and you've got a book on the sheet covers. Maybe you might have been reading the night before. You sit up abruptly, and just at the point where you wake up, birds start chirping outside your bedroom window. You wouldn't know whether they were chirping for a long time or not. So the birds start chirping, and two men start talking about the plants that they're going to plant. And in this case, what I'm trying to demonstrate is that the dream you are having is designed, in this example, it's a dream that doesn't contrast the experience that you're having in your waking state. And because it doesn't contrast it, my suggestion is that it would not be possible to know whether the first part of the conversation that you heard about their plans to plant the garden happened in a dream or in reality, what we call reality, in the waking state. In fact, your assumption would be that it didn't happen in a dream. Your assumption would be it happened while you were awake, and for a second you must have fallen asleep and then woken up again. And that you were hearing the conversation and the birds always in the waking state, because the dream that you were having was exactly the same and continuous with the waking state experience. So if we really think about this, there's something very significant comes out of that. What it demonstrates is that fundamentally, dream and daily life are fundamentally the same. They are the awareness of an experience arising in consciousness. And why a dream at night seems fundamentally different to the waking state is because the content often is in stark contrast to the content that we know as our reality. And even if in the dream the content was more or less the same, the transition point is always at a stark contrast, which means it doesn't flow smoothly from one experience to the next, which then creates the impression that dream is something that happens in my mind as the dreamer, and waking state is reality. If we're going to do this investigation to see, could it be that what I know as the waking state is actually no different from a dream that I'm able to understand fundamentally, which then means if I see that the waking state and the dream state are fundamentally the same, if I understand the dream state, I can start to understand the waking state by superimposing my understanding of the dream state onto my experience in the waking state. How does all of this relate to what we're really looking for? Remember, the beginning of the talks most times is to suggest that at the beginning of the search, a seeker makes sense to ask yourself this question. I'm going to put a lot of effort, I already have maybe put a lot of effort into seeking in my life. So if I'm going to continue to do this, I should know what I'm really looking for. And the suggestion is that the answer to that question, what am I really looking for, is the same for everyone. It's not that each person is so radically different that happiness for one person is this and happiness for the other is this. Happiness for the human being turns out to be the same thing, and that's because Happiness for the human being is never to be found based on pleasure. So it makes sense that each human being will have different preferences. So what pleases one human being will be different to what pleases another human being. So if our happiness was to be found in pleasure, 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 then what makes one person happy will be different to what makes another person happy. It turns out that this idea of happiness being found in pleasure, pleasure, pleasure is part of the problem. It's absolutely where human happiness is not to be found. Human happiness is found in the form of continuous, unbroken peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance we find ourselves in. When the human being is identified with needing pleasure, 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 and seeing the other person as the doer and seeing themselves as the doer, which is what this experience of life suggests. I am the doer, the other is the doer, and my happiness is to be found in pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. When we see life that way, we are forced to feel uncomfortable with life, forced to feel uncomfortable with ourselves for those things that we did that didn't turn out to be delivering pleasure, forced to feel uncomfortable with the things the other did that delivered pain to me, and forced to seek in the future life being a certain way, forced to seek and to expect life to be the way we want it. And so this attitude to life creates an uncomfortableness with oneself, which turns out to be our unhappiness, and peace of mind is the falling away, the ending of the capacity for the human experience to include suffering. Suffering in the form of guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. They're the five forms of suffering. And when we look at them, guilt, blame, and pride, based on the idea, I am the doer and the other is the doer. The other has functioned a certain way, delivered pain. I see them as the doer and I say, you hurt me, I hate you. And that hate is a feeling of uncomfortableness. When I function a certain way, and the way I function delivers pain to someone I love or a stranger or to myself, then I hate myself. Seeing myself as the doer and saying I shouldn't have done it that way, I'm a failure, and feeling that hate for oneself is a sense of shame or guilt, and that is uncomfortableness. And pride is based on the same principle of doership, but instead of in relation to actions that deliver pain, it's an attitude towards actions that deliver pleasure. And then we say, look at me, look what I have achieved. And even though on the surface that feeling might feel good because it's based on positive outcomes, really when we dive into it, it's still an uncomfortableness with oneself because it's based on a false idea of who we are. So, these are the forms of suffering. We've asked ourselves the question, what am I really looking for? We've hopefully come to see what I'm looking for is happiness, but happiness is never to be found where I thought it was to be found in outcomes. We've now seen that happiness is actually the absence of unhappiness, which is guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. Just the falling away of that. So how does coming to see life as an experience arising in consciousness or a dream, how does coming to see life as a momentary experience and what I am as a character is part of the experience, how does that affect what I'm really looking for? Happiness in daily living. The answer is that it might become very clear to us that whatever happens in life, moment after moment, is destiny, is predetermined according to the script of the dream that is unfolding, a script, a dream, a creation that the character has never been in control of, a script, a dream, a creation that the other in the dream is not in control of, a script, a dream, a creation that forces everyone in each moment to act exactly the way they act, which is exactly in line with the creation. So coming to see this means that the capacity to hate the other on the basis that they are the doer, that they have done this of their own free will, and that it is a malicious act against me, a personal act against me, does no longer make sense. What is seen is that the other is a character playing a role in order for destiny to unfold exactly as it's destined. So there'll be the understanding that if there is pain in a particular moment, it was destined for the main character to experience that pain, destined for that pain to be there, and destined for the other character to be the messenger or the deliverer of that pain through maybe their actions. And so from this point of view, we see ourselves as universal brothers and sisters, all in this together, and no longer see each other as enemies and rivals and competitors. Now, that happens not just because we see that the other is not the doer and I'm not the doer. It would be fair that if we see the other as not the doer and myself not the doer, that I might not be able to blame them, but it might not change the fact that that is still pain, and if pain is an attack on who I am, I still have to resist that even if it's impersonal. The deeper realization is that what I am is not actually the character, but rather the consciousness of the mind in which the dream is happening that has identified to a character and is using the character as a vehicle from which to experience the experience. And so when the character in the dream is attacked, if the character is not aware that deeper down, the essence of the character is not physical, is not part of the content of the dream, but is actually the very mind in which the whole dream arises, a mind that fundamentally is never affected, never touched by the content of the dreams that are continually arising and falling. So to the extent that the dream includes an awakening to the fact that the essence of the human being is actually a formless awareness, a formless consciousness that doesn't stem from the body, but stems from beyond or prior to the body, and is then functioning through the body in order to experience the dream from that perspective. So this understanding, this waking up, not intellectually understanding, but starting off with an intellectual understanding that then observes life and questions all of the beliefs that are deeply ingrained, that suggests that life is an objective reality. When that is questioned, a deep realization that is way beyond an intellectual realization can happen. And that allows us to drop into this field of being more and more often. So the realization that there is this field of being that essentially remains ever present regardless of circumstance, regardless of whether someone is attacking me physically or emotionally, whether circumstance is turning out as I would like or not. There is this field of being that I can rest in, assuming that life has brought about the ending of the intense involvement with what is happening. If the intense involvement with what is happening is still there, then our attention is focused outwardly, and attention doesn't get to turn inward and recognize the fact that the essence of the human being is something that doesn't grow old, that doesn't get sick, that doesn't get defined or added to or subtracted to based on what others say, what others do, or what circumstance is happening. And so with our resting in that place more and more frequently, coming to know ourselves on a deep, deep level, not intellectually, but know ourselves because we are being ourselves, To the extent that that happens more and more, we experientially come to know ourselves as untouched by what is happening in the flow of life. So we can then see life unfolding as a story, understand that the other is not the doer, that I'm not the doer, and therefore guilt and blame and pride no longer arise. We understand that what happens in the flow of life, what happens in the experience, is either pleasure or pain, and that pleasure or pain is never really a defining factor of what I am at my core, that what I am at my core is always there, always full, always self-confirming and self-fulfilling. We know that from our own experience, and therefore our involvement with what happens in the flow of life, our attachment to what happens in the flow of life gets broken, meaning the belief that my happiness is dependent on life being pleasure, 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 gets broken from our own experience, and we find ourselves in a state of equanimity. So this is what equanimity means. Equanimity with what is. The equanimity with what is because we are deeply grounded in the essence of the human being that knows itself to always be complete, knows itself to be unaffected by even death of the body. Death of the body means the end of the dream experience of life, the end of the story of Roger. So Roger has been having an experience of life, which is an experience of life from the perspective of a particular character. And at some point, that story has an end, the end of that experience. And to the extent that Roger, the character, has come to know that at the essence of that experience is consciousness, not a character. So when the character dies, the experience dies, but the consciousness that experiences all experience remains untouched. And so knowing ourselves on this level means even death is no longer a challenge to who I am. So if suffering arises in life, according to this framework, and I have to say that once this framework of the looking at life as a dream, which is the esoteric witnessing perspective, plus the framework of happiness and daily living, which talks about the functioning of each character based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning, or the predetermined story of life, God's will. The combination of the two frameworks, in my experience, means that we can very simply start to see life in a very different perspective to what was seen before. And as we see life more and more regularly from the perspective that life is a happening and not my doing, not the other's doing, where we understand that the human being is essentially a biological robot, on a biological and a physiological robot that is being designed by life, so programmed based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning, to function in each moment exactly as it's destined to function, given the circumstance and its makeup. So if we see this time and time again, yes, I thought something because I saw something, and I wasn't in control of what I saw, and the thought was a response to something, a stimuli. And the thought, which I believe is my doing, wouldn't have happened had the stimuli been different. If the stimuli was different, a different thought would have happened. If my genes and up-to-date conditioning was different, then the stimuli would create a different reaction. And when this reaction happens, or response happens, I'm not differentiating between response or reaction. They're all reactions or responses. When a thought, response, or reaction happens, which is based on mechanical factors, something in the human programming, the belief in personal doership, claims ownership over that as my doing. And so when someone does something that hurts us, we spend days ruminating over the fact that they shouldn't have done that. They could have done it differently. And all of that thinking would get cut off when the understanding arises. They acted exactly the way they were destined to act, based on the circumstance and their genes and up-to-date conditioning. It's not personal. Where the story has nothing to grab onto, it gets cut off, and the deeper and deeper the understanding goes, the more and more life has been seen time and time again to be this way, not the way that we've always related to life. The deeper and deeper it goes, the quicker and quicker any remaining story based on any of the old beliefs, the quicker it gets cut off, until such time as there's nothing inside of us that can possibly see life as personal. That can't, for not even a millisecond, mistake that what the other is doing is their doing. Not even for a second can mistake that what I am doing is my doing. And so the guilt and the blame don't arise. The pain still has to be experienced. The pleasure that will be a result of the actions that happen through me or the actions that happen through the other, that too has to be experienced. So this isn't about pushing pleasure or pain away. It's about a change happening on the level of our seeing of life, such that the attitude of suffering no longer arises in conjunction with the pleasure or pain in the moment. And I'm sure someone's going to ask the very valid question, which was asked this morning, what about responsibility? If we see that I'm not the doer and the other isn't the doer, what about responsibility? So here's the answer on responsibility. Is that how responsibly we act in life is based on also our genes and up-to-date conditioning. But it's based on the genes and up-to-date conditioning which are biological in nature, not psychological in nature. The belief in personal doership and attachment to outcomes is psychological, meaning it's the part of the brain, the thinking mind, that has been conditioned by life, by the way the experience of life is, to deeply, deeply believe that I am the doer and the other is the doer, and that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. That's the thinking mind, the psychological conditioning. How we act, whether we're responsible or not, is not solely governed by the thinking mind. In fact, we find out when the thinking mind dissolves and we observe what happens, is we find out that how we act is heavily governed by our biological makeup, our biological genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so when the thinking mind dissolves, and we no longer see ourselves as the doer and see the other as the doer, what someone hearing this might think, what the mind might assume is that, this means that the person whose belief in personal doership has fallen away is going to become very irresponsible. They're going to become a loose cannon in society. This is not a good thing, that the belief in personal doership falls away. That's based on the assumption that the psychological mind is the part of the mind that controls how we act. And it turns out that the psychological mind is much more responsible for the acts of hatred and greed and lack of self-respect than anything else. All of the hatred towards the other, for what the other has done throughout your history. This load of guilt and blame is contained in the thinking mind. And it's that load of guilt and blame contained in the thinking mind that creates the impulse to want more, to see the other as an enemy or a rival or a competitor. And when we see the other as an enemy for what they have done and we hate them, we want to get our revenge. And when we feel like my happiness is to be found in pleasure, which is also contained in the thing, we want more at the expense of others without taking the other into consideration. When that part of the mind dissolves, that motivation dissolves with it. And what we find is we're left with a biological set of conditionings. And innately, life through evolution has designed us biologically to have empathy, to want to see the other happy too. And so to the extent that the psychological mind falls away, our biological conditioning is still in place. The biological conditioning before the belief in personal doership fell away was such that we didn't pick up a machine gun and go and shoot people in the street. And we find that we didn't pick up a machine gun and shoot people not because the belief in doership was there, but because our biological makeup was such that that doesn't make sense to us. And similarly, when the belief in doership falls away, it still won't make sense. And so we won't find ourselves going out and being highly irresponsible and wanting to hurt anyone. In fact, much less so because of this innate desire for equanimity, the innate desire for everyone else to be happy. And we find that in life, it is this load of guilt and blame, hatred and shame that overrules that very intelligent biological makeup. It overrules it because there's all this hatred. And so it's the hatred that forces people to forget their biological makeup that is quite happy for everyone to be happy. And it forces the hatred to come out and hurt people, intentionally hurt people. Now, this isn't to say that when our psychological makeup falls away, that our biological genes and up-to-date conditioning will never hurt anyone. But they won't intentionally hurt someone. It won't go out to get revenge over something that someone has done to us. But in the functioning, based on our genes and up-to-date conditioning on the biological level, I might choose to do X, Y, and Z in my day, and X, Y, and Z might not be in line with the preference of someone else. And in that case, the fact that I did X, Y, and Z will deliver pain to the other. So it doesn't make us a perfect human being. It doesn't make us a saint that will always do exactly what everyone else wants. But it will mean that this load of guilt and blame has fallen away. It will mean that the hatred and shame has fallen away. And it will mean that we won't intentionally see the other as an enemy and exact our revenge. So what the mind thinks is going to be an irresponsible human being, a loose cannon in society because now they no longer believe that they are the doer and the other and the doer, doesn't turn out in practice. In fact, we find that when that doership falls away, someone tends to be much more equanimitous with life, much less aggressive. And so the irony, the paradox, is exactly this. This is really good news. life is not personal. Life is much lighter when it's not taken personally. If anyone is feeling like this is bad news because everything is predetermined and I'm not in control of life, that's the doer that feels like it needs outcomes in order to be fulfilled and happy. It's the doer hearing that and saying, this is bad news. I'm not in control, that life is unfolding. It's a story, it's not real. This is bad news for me. It's bad news for the doer, but the good news is the doer doesn't serve any valid purpose except to create suffering. So the doer belief has been put in place as part of this dream in order for this dream to include suffering. This is the twist, the catch-22 is that the doer thinks it needs to function in order to bring about what we're really looking for. The doer believes it needs to function to one day bring about happiness for the human being. And what's being pointed at when we really look at this description of non-doership, it's saying that the doership is causing all of the suffering. What we're looking for is the end of suffering, and therefore the conclusion is that the doer needs to stop functioning. The doer needs to dissolve. But here's the catch. The doer can't take this on as a task and say, I need to stop functioning. If the doer takes it on as a task and says, I need to make myself stop functioning, that is the doer giving itself a new task, which means the doer continuing to function. And so what is the point, we might ask, of Roger saying that happiness is the end of suffering, that suffering is the dissolving of the doer, and yet you're saying that I can't make that happen. And the reason it's said is because the story of life is bringing about these words. There isn't a doer that believes it is saying these words of its own accord. It's understood that life is functioning through a biological robot, producing new conditioning or delivering new conditioning to other biological robots. And this new conditioning has the potential to change the conditioning in the other biological robot. It doesn't require the other biological robot to do anything. A machine, when it gets programmed, doesn't participate, doesn't have to do the programming. The programming happens to it. And then the machine functions differently. So these talks are simply life delivering new conditioning through a biological robot to another biological robot, and it requires no one to do anything. There never has been anyone that does anything. Life has always been conditioning us this way as a happening. What life, the particular conditioning, has brought into place the belief that there is a doer that is continually trying to claim ownership over what is happening. Not trying, it continually claims ownership over what's happening and continually functions trying to get somewhere in life, trying to achieve something. And at some point it even tries to achieve, instead of outcomes, it tries to achieve the end of suffering, which it will never achieve. The end of suffering happens when the biological instrument is programmed sufficiently for a stop to automatically happen, meaning that the biological instrument is programmed to realize in an instant, in a flash, when it's destined, that if I as the doer try to make this happen, I'm the problem. And so in an instant this is realized, and the biological instrument knows that the only option is for it not to think along the lines of doership. And once that becomes clear, then after that, the thinking along the lines of doership will still happen, but they'll be seen, oh, there it is again, that's me, which I thought was useful, I thought was going to get me something, but now I see that's more suffering. And so as soon as it's seen, it can get cut off. And we drop back into being again. Oh yes, this being, remember? So doing, I need to get somewhere, I need to do something. How do I stop being the doer? Tell me, how do I do it? Yeah, you told me that, but I didn't get it. Now, tell me again so I can do it. You know, that's the doer part of us that's desperate, needs to. And then if the working part of the mind recognizes that's the problem, in an instant it realizes, stop. Oh, and here it is. It didn't need to go anywhere. Yeah, it's always been here, right now. Didn't need to achieve anything or become better at seeking, better at understanding. It didn't need to get very much other than, oh, what I've been trying to do is suffering. Stop. And then go, oh, here it is again. It's always here, except this, tell me where it is. Where is it? I don't know where it is. It's over there. All of that is covering it up. Stop. Oh, I forgot. Here it is. And while the doership is strong, we might stop and it feels boring. It feels like, no, this can't be it, because we haven't really stopped. So if we stop, or what we think is stop, and it's like, and yep, please something. It's just that we haven't stopped. Which is not remember, it's not our fault. There isn't a doer that it's just that we're designed in that moment to not know as a machine, not know how to stop. The machine hasn't been designed and conditioned yet to know how to stop. Once it does, this is the great thing, once the machine knows how to stop, it just stops. It's like, oh great, it doesn't need to function. The biological side will function, the thinking in the working mind, all of that. The stopping is just the stopping of the thinking mind. The working mind, the body then continues to function. The body doesn't have to sit in like this for the rest of its life. That would be the stopping on the biological as well as the psychological level. The stop is on the psychological level, so the biological can keep on functioning, and the psychological, which is now witnessing, is witnessing the biological robot doing whatever it does in life, watching anger arising in the biological robot, if anger in the moment arises, watching peace there, watching excitement, if excitement happens, watching speaking happens, watching eating happening in the background, which also doesn't mean that we live life passively, so it means the body is participating, but the psychological mind is not involved in what is happening, meaning it's not attached to life unfolding a particular way. The biological will still have its genes and up-to-date conditioning. Part of the genes and up-to-date conditioning will be the body's preferences. So on a biological level, the body is still going to move towards pleasure and away from pain. But on a biological level, there isn't an attachment to the pleasure being delivered. So on a biological level, the body will do whatever it can in each moment to experience pleasure and not pain. But understanding that it is not in control of the outcome. And so when life delivers pain, even when the body is moving towards pleasure, the pain is experienced. The psychological mind doesn't get into a big huff about it like it used to, because all of those beliefs are dissolved. The biological can do what it thinks it can to fix the situation, also knowing the outcome is not in its control. And that's life happening. Life happening, being lived as if I am the human being. That becomes the experience again. It's like, oh, so in practical terms, I am the human being functioning on a biological level based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning. And something simultaneously is witnessing what the body is doing. And what is witnessed is the experience of Roger. And so life is lived as if I am Roger, doing in each moment exactly what I think or feel to do, with the absence of suffering. So enlightenment is the end of suffering. Enlightenment is human happiness. The end of suffering is human happiness, or happiness through peace of mind. Enlightenment is peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance you find yourself in. So my suggestion, that's the concept of enlightenment that Ramesh put forward. It's the concept of enlightenment that helped me to drop all other expectations. It's the concept of enlightenment that, from my experience, is the most accurate based on my experience. Buddha, this is how I came across Buddhism in a fairly limited way. Enlightenment is the end of suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. Desire is effectively, when it's used that way, the belief that I need life to be pleasure, 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 pleasure in order to be complete. And desire is the strong, uncomfortable yearning for something. I need that. And then, as a result, we spend our life trying to get it. We spend our life seeing the other as the enemy when they get in the way of us getting it. We see ourselves as the enemy when we do things that prevents us from getting it. When we actually get it on occasions, it doesn't satisfy, and so we feel discontent, and we start seeking for the next pleasure, feeling like we need some pleasure to fill in the uncomfortableness, not realizing that the uncomfortableness is coming from somewhere else. It's coming from not knowing ourselves, not being connected to who I am. And I'm not connected to who I am because there's a whole lot of beliefs that are telling me I'm something else. Beliefs that tell me I am simply a physical entity. Beliefs that tell me that I need pleasure in order to be complete, which is now telling me reinforcing that I'm something I'm not really. Beliefs that tell me I'm the doer, which is reinforcing something I'm not really. Beliefs telling me that the other is the doer, which is something that fundamentally me and the other are not. Beliefs telling me that life is an objective reality, and that I, as a physical entity, am an objective reality, something that I fundamentally am not. So obviously, if I'm obsessed with this image of myself, which is completely different to what I am at my core, and I'm staring at some object, that's what I am, completely transfixed with an object, thinking I am that, then obviously attention, awareness can't land on what I really am. So someone's like staring at the object, and a spiritual teaching comes along and starts shaking them and saying, you're not jumping in the way of the thing that they're staring at, going, oh, you're not this, you're not this. You know? So that the attention on it can get broken. And then maybe there's a chance for attention to land on what we really are.
So I wonder, is it possible that when a disease is created, that might be some kind of a reminder of stop, be here?
Yes, although we're getting into shaky ground, because what if we start looking at this? If it's just a reminder to stop, great. Then let's look at disease as a reminder to stop. Let's actually pick as many reminders to stop as possible, right? If we start creating ideas that, oh, I've created my disease by not stopping, that I can heal my disease, then we start getting into shaky ground. Because the fact is, some diseases are destined to not get healed. And if we have certain ideas about our capacity or the reasoning behind certain things, like disease, we might end up just coming up with a convenient story that makes us feel good, makes us think that we can fix something instead of accepting it. Now, that doesn't mean, oh, accept the disease and do nothing about it. Accept it's there and do whatever you can to heal the disease. Conventional medicine or relaxation, meditation, knowing the outcome's not in your control. Where what I would add that puts some weight onto the fact that we can look at disease as a reminder to stop, is that the doership that is continually functioning, like tell me where to go, what to do, this is what I need, all the regret, about what we've done. I regret everything I've done in the past. I'm such a failure. All of the blame, I hate these people. They're always trying, the world is cruel, and all of that load is a very dense energy. It's an uncomfortableness with oneself. We can see what it does to us in daily life. It changes the experience we have of life from something light and sort of formless in a sense, where we feel that the body is actually doesn't have any boundaries or edges, to something very concrete and dense. And so things like cancer could well be a manifestation. So if we start looking at so I wouldn't say this is truth, but we look at certain theories of energy bodies, things like that, and people who specialize in seeing energy bodies and whatever often talk about seeing a dense energy in the energy body, and then seeing that dense energy makes its way down into the physical body and might manifest as a physical cancer. And so if let's say that's true, and we know from our own experience that suffering is a very dense and heavy energy. When we find ourselves in nature doesn't suffer. Nature doesn't have a thinking mind that can blame the other tree that has fallen onto it and broken it as well. It can't blame that tree for doing this. Animals don't even blame other animals that eat their partners or rip off their leg. They experience the pain. They don't have a thinking mind that attributes personal doership to other animals. So biologically they will run away. But once it's finished, then they're back in the present moment. They're not thinking about the fox that chased it and blaming the fox for doing what it did. So when we're in nature, we can feel a resonance, an energy, a vibration that is much higher. And it can bring us into that resonance. When we find ourselves around people that don't have this strong sense of personal doership, we find ourselves in an energy field that is also vibrating at that higher level, and it can bring our energy into that vibrancy for a period of time. And when we go into cities that are heavily populated with people working hard in conditions that aren't that great, the doership energy is very strong, and so we feel a more dense energy. Now, when I say if you're in the vicinity of someone without strong sense of personal doership, how it can relax us, the fact is that they're not delivering anything to you. In that instance, it's just bringing your energy into the same frequency. But ultimately, the energy that a master has found, they haven't done anything, that has just arisen in them because the beliefs in doership, which bring an end to the belief that I am a separate entity and expose that it is source functioning through me and functioning through everyone. When that belief is dissolved, it's their true nature that functions, that vibrates at that energy. And so that true nature is the true nature of everyone, because the same one source is functioning through everyone. So coming into that frequency in nature or in satsang is just really a reminder of what our true nature really is. So there isn't anything that a teacher gives to someone else's energy, there isn't a transmission of something. The only thing that's transmitted in these talks is a set of concepts, pointers that are very useful at undoing the belief systems that create this heaviness. So, yes, let's sometimes look at disease as possibly a result of doership. But having said that, we see sages that have died from cancer, and now we need to come up with an explanation, either of how the doership that they've taken on from other people, let's say, will be one explanation, has then manifested as a cancer in their later life. So they've taken it on as a service, could be one perspective, which, this teaching doesn't go down that road. Maybe they don't take it on as a service, but they can't help but be affected by the doership and being open, it comes into their field. That could be another. But, all of this is like, how is that relevant to what we're really looking for? That's what we have to come back to. So as long as our thinking about these subjects ends up bringing us back to what I'm really looking for is happiness for Roger in this life, and happiness turns out to be the end of the thinking mind, the end of suffering, the end of the doer functioning. So if an investigation is going to help contribute to that, then I think it's worthwhile. If it's not, this is why this question can be useful, because we can go off for weeks and months and years sometimes working with a whole lot of concepts about aliens and different dimensions and special powers manifesting, and think that that's important. Having conversations about whether there are, parallel universes. To me, those conversations, if they're relevant to what I'm really looking for in life, if they contribute to the end of suffering, which is guilt, blame, pride, expectation, and worry, they contribute by undoing the beliefs in personal doership and attachment to outcome, then great. If they don't, it's best if we realize this, and then we can just say, actually, I don't need to know about all that stuff. An example of parallel universes, how that could contribute, is once we open to the mind that there could be parallel experiences. If we open to that, then that says, in that case, the universe isn't as physical as we imagine, as it appears, because how can you have a parallel universe if it's a physical thing? So what that can do is open our mind to see that, maybe this is an experience, one of many infinite possible experiences, and there are lots of experiences running parallel to this. The fact that there are or there aren't is irrelevant once we've come to see the possibility that this could be just an experience. Then whether there are two parallel experiences or 2 billion parallel experiences or no parallel experiences. It's like, who cares? We're in this parallel experience. Now we're seeing it as an experience, we're in this experience, and now we're seeing it as an experience rather than an objective reality. So then I could say that discussion is useful, but we don't need to go into a whole lot of technical arguments about whether there are or whether there aren't.
So yesterday you were talking about when suffering arises, say for example the feeling of anger, how we can either witness it or go into the feeling, like really feel the feeling. And I think there was a third option, which I can't remember.
The third option is saying, well, no, this is just a story. I'm not even going to
yes.
give it any credence.
So if we, so in the second option, going into the feeling, it seems that labeling, putting words to it is the key kind of component to that. So I have a couple questions. I think the first is, what if we can't quite pinpoint or find the words that properly describe this feeling?
Yeah. So first, let me be clear, because it makes it sound like we can choose, we can do witnessing, or we can do feeling. What it's really saying is that at some point, one of those three will happen, and they'll happen based on what's destined to happen in that moment. They'll happen based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And this topic came up in relation to, in non-dual seeking, coming to witness life. Not at first, when we hear witness life, we hear, oh, me as the body is going to observe what's happening in life. That's not really witnessing. Witnessing is when even the body is witnessed as a happening in life, right? And so the suggestion in non-dual teachings is to witness everything as a happening, to know that what is happening is not happening to you. You are the formless awareness that is witnessing, not as a separate witnesser, but there's just witnessing happening, which is a very passive thing. It requires us to not try to do witnessing. It's just a shift that happens at some point. And in non-dual teachings, often that is the primary and what is needed to be focused on at first, to create this separation, which can then watch life as a happening, watch life as a dream or an experience unfolding. And that's generally the awakening part. But what we find is we get dragged back in to suffering, into the body, and for a while we think witnessing is the answer. And yesterday I suggested that to hear that as well as witnessing, at times it's very valid to not go into witnessing and just have the feeling dissolve, but to be curious as to what is at the root of this feeling. Because if we don't know what's at the root of the feeling, it may temporarily dissolve, but it's going to keep coming back because the root hasn't been seen. So then the thought is, at a particular, or the suggestion, at a particular point in time, you might feel like today is the day that I'm going to go into it, which is a happening, right? That day, the feeling is to go into it. And generally speaking, the feeling is a bit amorphous. So you don't really know, it's not very defined. You just know it's overwhelming and maybe a bit and heavy. But you don't know the fine details of it. And so starting to put words on it, words that you know are relevant to this sort of, this suffering, this uncomfortableness, so words that will fit under the category of guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. So you could start off by saying, this is a feeling of guilt. And if no bells go off, then it's a good sign it's not feeling it. This is a feeling of blame. And as soon as you say it, my relationship to this happening is that it goes, yes, and it gets a little bit more defined, the feeling gets a little bit more defined. And then we might come to see that under blame, there is hatred for what the other has done to hurt you, there is jealousy, there is resentment, there's everyday garden variety vanilla blame for small things, and other forms of blame. And so once we know it's blame, now we can start focusing on figuring out what, or feeling, not really figuring out, feeling what it is more specifically. And so you can then do the same. Resentment? No. Hatred? And it just gets a little stronger. So this is not an activity that you say, I'm going to do this tonight at 5 o'clock. That would be a bit more of the doer thing. This is something that will just spontaneously happen. One day you wake up and you just have this feeling inside. And this movement that I'm describing might then just happen. And so then you say, what did we say? Resentment, no. Hatred, and it gets stronger. And then you might start to see an event that it's related to. At this point, you might not see an event. So then you might need to feel in what's hatred? It's like hatred for being abandoned, maybe, or for not being respected, or for being attacked. So you go through a list of what it possibly could be, and each time you land on something that is in line with the feeling gets a bit more complete, until such time the feeling is developed enough, has been teased to the surface enough that you can cry or you can shout. And when you are crying and shouting, generally a whole lot is revealed about what this feeling is about, an event, let's say. And from that place, you can see a storyline of doership and hatred that was locked away in relation to that earlier event.
So earlier when you were talking about just stopping, and then you were saying that sometimes there might be this boredom or feeling of restlessness because the machine just hasn't learned to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Is that also a feeling of boredom or restlessness?
Yes.
I feel like that is the subtle feeling of suffering, but I don't know how to, label that or.
Well, that's it. So it might not be that in all circumstances you are able to do this labeling and this process. It's only when it's destined to happen that it's going to flower in the way I suggest. So sometimes you might feel suffering and it's just not destined for this teasing it out to happen. But what you just brought up is an important point, is, if I say that the biological and psychological entity is just not designed to be able to stop, it could be because that load of doership is too strong for stopping. So whenever a quasi-stopping happens, what we feel is just an uncomfortableness. So often the reason we don't stop is because when we stop it feels terrible, and so the direction, the instruction we get from this feeling is, don't stay here, go and do something about it. So we've become very good at distracting ourselves, or going off and distracting ourselves with a mission to fix this. we have to realize that no, this uncomfortable feeling is something we need to come to understand, not escape from. And so this is where this whole exercise comes in. So we now have some logic that says, even though this feeling is telling me to run and to go and fix it, now we have some logic that's saying, no, that's never worked. You have to do it differently. And so the explanation here is that that energy that's in the body that feels so uncomfortable is a load of guilt and blame, shame and hatred, that's been locked away, that's being carried around as a backpack, a load that the human has, and it is preventing that, just the heavy doership in that is preventing a stopping and a dropping into peace. To the extent it starts coming out, what we find is that the energy in the body starts having less charge. And once it has less charge, we might find ourselves dropping into being more regularly and witnessing happening. Or it's the other way around, we find witnessing happening often, but we still get dragged into these energies. Whichever it is, we just need to realize, the energy has the beliefs in doership in it. And at the root of that, there is a particular event that still hasn't been seen to not be anyone's doing. And an event that has delivered pain that still hasn't been seen to not have been an attack on who I am.
So when you say that when the energy starts coming out, I guess, so is it that just by staying with the feeling, those things will reveal itself?
Yeah, if it's destined at that point in time. So this is where, it's also a fine line. I don't want it to sound like this is some sort of therapy training. And therapy training can be very valid, but it's a different process again. They might have their parallels, but what I'm saying here is there's no one doing this. This is something that we're mentioning here. It's becoming part of your up-to-date conditioning, and it's not telling you to go and do this. It's saying that because none of the concepts is ever a prescription to a doer. It's always a description of how life is or what might happen. A prescription that is being delivered, a description that's being delivered, and the deliverance of that description is simply new conditioning that will, at some point, bring the body maybe to move in this way. So when it happens, it's not your doing. You might watch, the body today, in this moment, is doing an investigation into the nature of this feeling by feeling. It's a happening. And the happening of this investigation starts off by feeling and staying with the feeling, which also is not a prescription. I'm not saying I prescribe you to stay with the feeling. It's a description of how this process unfolds when it unfolds.
Yeah, that was going to be my last question, was because I remember you saying that this has to be done in the context of the understanding of non-doership. And because I wouldn't have, from that feeling of discomfort, I wouldn't have thought that it would contain all those things that you just described. But so that's what you mean by that has to be done within the understanding of non-doership, because it's not a doer that's trying to...
Well, hopefully we see this happening, this process happening, and see that, it's just life unfolding. So also we see that this process of feeling the feeling is not done by a doer. That clearly means that our understanding of non-doership is there and being applied to this situation, right? What I really meant in that this has to be done with a broader understanding of non-doership is that if the individual has a good intellectual understanding and a deepening understanding about life being a happening, about the other not being the doer, and about me not being the doer, in their present relationship to life, right? Then when we feel these energies that have been locked away from the past. So in the past, we didn't have that attitude to life of non-doership. In the past, we had the attitude of doership. So to the extent that life has brought about a changing of your attitude towards life in the present moment, where we can see it more and more as a happening and not my doing, to the extent it's done that, there's a contrast of attitudes, a contrast of the present moment attitude, our conscious way of seeing life now, and the unconscious locked away attitude in the energy. The locked away attitude in the energy is an attitude of doership, and our current way of seeing life is much less doership and a bit more non-doership. So when the feeling starts coming up, the feeling is going to contain a whole lot of doership in it, right? That's fine. We're not trying to change that into non-doership. We allow it to come up with all of the doership in it, like vomiting in a sense, right? And the understanding that we have on a conscious level now, because life has started to bring us this understanding, sees this energy, this vomiting of this energy, and it just sees it as that energy locked away based on an old attitude to circumstance. And the current understanding allows that to happen. Seeing that it's all a mistake that was locked away in the past based on these set of mistaken beliefs. If we access these feelings of suppressed hatred in the body, and we have no context of seeing it as a mistake, then it'll come up and we'll feel all this hatred towards, I don't know, a brother or a sister, a mother or a father or a lover or whatever. We'll feel all this hatred, and then we'll just believe it to be true, and it will express, but it won't release. If we can, at the same time as allowing all the hatred to be there and be expressed, right, not necessarily to the person. My experience is you go out on a boat in the ocean on your own, or you go into the forest, or you have a room in your house that you feel safe and don't feel embarrassed that people, I've had people go and do this in my house when I'm not there, and they go out into the garden at the middle of the night and they're screaming, and I get a message from my neighbors, saying, hey, there was some strange stuff happening at your house, is everyone okay? So, there's a sensibility as to where you do it, and if you do it in a private place as well, it means you become more confident in just allowing this energy to come out. If you do it somewhere and someone starts yelling at you, because there's a lot of doership in this energy, and energy spreads. So if you do this in public, people get angry with it because they can feel the energy in it, on top of the fact that screaming in public. If it comes out in public, well, it comes out in public, It's wherever it comes out might be good. So yeah, this watching it as an error that was locked away in the past, not an error you made, but an error life put in place, that's what allows it to be transmuted. So it comes out and some of the load is reduced. And that doesn't mean that the next week a whole lot more comes out, and then the week after a whole lot more comes out. And some people say, well, is this ever going to end? It just doesn't seem to end. More and more and more. To me, it is finite, or it's not even that you have to express all of it. It's just each time it's expressing, it's showing you the principle of doership and hatred and blame and grief and guilt. And eventually, a combination of seeing it like that and all of the witnessing of life, all of this teaching, creates such a deep understanding of non-doership, where we can't possibly see life as someone's doing and my doing anymore, that it takes the floor out from underneath all of this energy, and it just dissolves. And how it dissolves, when it dissolves, we might not even know. What the bits we know are when it's coming out in this expression form. There's other ways it can be dissolving. It could be dissolving without us even knowing it. And at some point, we realize that we feel lighter, we go through life is painful, and the reaction, not the reaction, but the suffering, the psychological attitude is not arising, or it arises and it gets cut off, or it arises and it's for shorter duration. And the fact that we see this, either it doesn't arise at all, or if it doesn't arise at all, it means the load has been removed. If it arises and it gets cut off, it means the understanding is very deep. And if it arises and it's there for shorter and shorter durations, it means the understanding is going deeper. So once the intellectual understanding goes deeper and deeper and deeper, eventually it becomes total. And when it's total, it would have uprooted all of the misunderstanding in the body. So as the intellectual understanding goes deeper and deeper and deeper, it's uprooting the misunderstanding in the body. And what do I mean by an intellectual understanding going deeper and deeper and deeper? It means this, that when the concepts are put forward, like a concept that says human happiness is never to be found in outcomes, which is where we have assumed it to be, human happiness turns out to be the absence of suffering. So that's a concept. When someone hears it, they either understand the concept or they don't. If the words are too complex for them, then they won't understand. So if I put forward a quantum physics concept, someone might not even understand it intellectually. When we put forward a concept like this, it's sort of fairly simple English language. Hopefully there is an understanding of the difference of what suffering is, and all of the different components of the concept. So once that's understood, I understand this intellectually. But experientially, well, or on a very deep level, I'm not sure. And we know this where we go out into the world, we understand it, we're sitting in satsang and we think, actually, I think maybe I've got this. It makes sense. And then we go out into the world and someone does something and the understanding goes out the window. And what comes up is this opposite misunderstanding. And so then we can realize, oh, okay, I understand it intellectually, but deep in the body, the opposite beliefs still exist. And the process of investigating the concepts for yourself, seeing them in your own experience in daily life, which just starts happening. You can't help but, you'll stub your toe and the thought will arise, that's pain in the moment. Like, it's not just a thought saying pain, you feel the pain, you experience it, and then the thought says, actually, this is just pain in the moment. And you might notice that simultaneous to stubbing your toe, some guilt arises for being clumsy. And when the thought says, this is just pain in the moment, you might see that the guilt falls away because there's also the recognition that I'm not the doer. I didn't actively make myself stub my toe. And so we start seeing, there is a relationship here. There's pain in the moment and there's my attitude to the pain in the moment. And that with a certain up-to-date conditioning, my attitude can change. And so the falling away of the guilt is an actual changing of your attitude. And you can start to see this for yourself, not because Roger says it, but you see it for yourself in daily life, because these descriptions are descriptions of the daily life experience. So you can't miss it, really. And as that is seen more and more and more, we start putting ticks next to the various concepts. Tick, 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 I agree. The flow of life is either pleasure or pain. Tick. Because you experience it. And the more ticks that we put next to the concepts, the deeper the understanding goes. And the deeper the understanding goes, the quicker it cuts off suffering, until such time as it's uprooted all of the energies in the body, including through that process that I mentioned of cathartic release, which is not something you have to worry about, it'll just happen when it happens. And so a story that I have told often, just to make this point about the intellectual understanding going deeper and deeper and deeper, is illustrated quite well by an event that happened to me in India recently. Was walking up a mountain, or not a mountain, a hill with a path, and there were a lot of monkeys. And this little monkey, only a few months or even few weeks old, one was on the rock and wasn't afraid and wanted to play with me. It was putting its hand out, and I was looking at its face, and it had this most amazing, intricate lines, and it just looked so human-like in a sense, or well, whatever. It was just a very sweet animal. And several years before, in a conversation somewhere, someone told me, if you smile at a monkey, it's going to take that as a sign of aggression. And for a second, my mind didn't compute. Like, what do you mean? If you smile at a monkey, take it as a sign of aggression. And then my mind clicked. It's like, you're smiling, you're showing your teeth, which in monkey language is, I'm going to kill you, or something along those lines. And so then it clicked. Intellectually, I got it. If I smile at a monkey, the monkey doesn't know I'm feeling happy. It thinks I'm angry, because obviously monkeys don't smile from happiness. And so anyway, I was looking at this monkey, amazed that it was not afraid and whatever. And suddenly this feeling of joy came into my body, and a smile came onto my face. And this monkey instantaneously, 2-3-week-old monkey, jumped back about a meter and screeched. And straight away its mother heard this and screeched and came running over. And whoa. And so in that instant, I was able to put a tick next to the concept that I had understood 2 years earlier. That if I smile at a monkey is going to take that as a sign of aggression because X, Y, and I told you the story. So I put a tick next to it. So my intellectual understanding has gone deeper based on my experience in life. And then one swallow doesn't make a summer, is the saying, so you have to test this a little bit more. So I smiled at some more monkeys. And one of them was a big monkey, and instead of it jumping away, it ran towards me. So I stopped smiling at the big, because when I say big monkey, they're only this size, but if you see them, you don't want to mess with a monkey. I'm 3 times its size, but it could kick my... you can really know what people mean by it's a beast when you see it. It doesn't. And then I smiled at another monkey that was further away on a wire of a suspension bridge, and it was eating, and it had no interest in me because it was saying, "You're a human. You're over there. I'm on a wire. You can't get to me," and whatever. So the understanding is we don't take the concept absolutely. It has to become our lived understanding based on what we experience. So then it's no longer a concept that a teacher has given you. It becomes your knowing from your own experience. And to the extent that we see that what I do in each moment is a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning, what I do on a biological and psychological level, based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning, and I couldn't act differently because my genes and up-to-date conditioning are very precisely one way in a moment, the way they are, based on the genes that were delivered at birth, any changes to the genes, if that happens. So modern science is now saying genes actually change in time, but the genes weren't my doing, and how the genes change is not in my control, and how life impacts me moment after moment and conditions me, makes up my makeup at any particular point in time, but I wasn't in control of that. So the more we see this, the more we realize that it's a happening, not my doing. And once we've seen it enough times, in enough situations, then it becomes impossible to see life the old way. And that means that when someone does something to hurt me, or something that hurts me, they don't even need to do it intentionally, I understand this is pain in the moment. This is my destiny in this moment for pain to be there because nothing else was there. This is here. So destiny is what is. And an individual that is seen as a separate individual in control is no longer seen. So I don't see it as an individual delivering that pain, but rather life through an individual delivering pain. life through an instrument that has been designed and programmed a particular way to act exactly the way they did in that moment. And then what more is there to do except endure the pain or enjoy the pleasure if someone is giving pleasure without this load of guilt and blame, without a load of attachment to pleasure and pain, thinking that pleasure and pain is what will define who I am at my core. So, thank you.